Phil Ivey's Secret Formula: How Legends Simplify Complex Math. Phil Ivey has won over $26 million in live tournaments, 10 World Series of Poker bracelets, considered by many the best all-around player in the world. And you know what his secret is? It's not luck. It's not magical intuition. It's math. But not the kind of math you think. While amateurs get lost calculating complicated pot odds and exact percentages, Phil Ivey uses a system so simple you can apply it in less than 2 seconds in your head, and this system is worth millions. There's a concept Phil Ivey teaches in his masterclass that completely destroys how amateurs think about poker. He calls it pot sizing control. Most players think bet sizing is about valuing hands. Phil thinks differently. Phil uses bet sizing to control how much money goes into the pot. If he has a medium hand and doesn't want to face a giant bet, he bets small. This forces the opponent to play for the price Phil wants, not the price the opponent wants. Here's the exact example he gives. You have top pair with a medium kicker. The board is dangerous. If you check, your opponent might bet 3/4 of the pot and put you in an impossible decision. But if you bet 1/3 of the pot first, you control the price. You decide how much money is at stake. This seems simple, but think about the math. When you control the pot size, you control the pot odds you're giving your opponent. And when you control pot odds, you control whether they can call profitably or not. Phil Ivey has a math rule he uses in every calling decision. He calls it the rule of 4 and 2. And it's so simple even a child can calculate it. Here it is. After the flop, multiply your outs by 4. This gives you your approximate probability of hitting your hand by the river. After the turn, multiply your outs by 2. This gives you your chance of hitting on the river. Practical example, you have a flush draw on the flop. That means 9 outs. 9 times 4 is 36%. You have a 36% chance of making your flush by the river. Simple as that. Now compare with pot odds. The pot has $100. Your opponent bets 50. You're getting pot odds of 150 to 50, which is 3 to 1, or 25%. You need 25% equity to call. You have 36%. Calling is profitable. Phil Ivey doesn't sit there doing complex calculations. He multiplies by 4, compares to the pot, decides. 2 seconds. Now comes the concept that separates Phil Ivey from intermediate players: implied odds. Most players know what implied odds are, but they don't know when to use them. Phil explains it like this. Implied odds are the money you expect to win on future streets if you hit your hand. It's not the money that's in the pot now. It's the money that will go into the pot. Here's the example Phil uses. You have 76 suited. Flop comes 8-9J with 2 of your suit. You have a gut shot straight draw plus a flush draw. Your outs, 4 cards for the straight, 9 cards for the flush. But you need to discount duplicates. Let's say 12 clean outs. 12 times 4 is 48%. You're almost 50-50, but the pot is only giving you pot odds of 30%. Mathematically, you should fold. But Phil doesn't fold. Why? Because he knows that if he hits the straight or flush, the opponent will pay much more on future streets. Phil is deep stacked. The opponent is a calling station. Phil calculates that if he hits, he'll win at least 2 more big bets. So he adds those future bets to the current pot. Now his implied odds say the call is profitable, and Phil calls. This is thinking ahead. This is professional. But Phil Ivey also teaches the dark side of implied odds. He calls them reverse implied odds, and this is where amateurs lose everything. Reverse implied odds are when you hit your hand but still lose money because your opponent has something better. Classic example. You have a flush draw, you hit your flush. But the board paired on the river. Your opponent has a full house. You pay him off. Phil says, when you're in a situation where hitting your hand can still cost you money, your implied odds are negative. You shouldn't be in the hand. Here's how he simplifies it. Before calling with a draw, ask yourself, if I hit, will I always win? If the answer is no, discount that from your implied odds. If the board can get dangerous, if your opponent might have something better, reduce your implied odds by 30 to 50%. Phil uses small suited connectors as an example. You have 5 to 6 suited. You hit a straight. But there's a possibility of a bigger straight. Your reverse implied odds are bad. Phil folds these situations more often than he calls. Here's the formula Phil uses for bet sizing when he has the best hand. It's a value extraction formula, and it's pure mathematics. Phil asks, what's the maximum my opponent will pay? Not how much I want to bet, how much they will pay. If Phil has the nuts and knows the opponent has the second best hand, he doesn't bet pot. He bets enough to make the opponent feel like they're getting correct pot odds to call, but they're actually losing money. Example, the pot has 200. Phil has a flush. He thinks the opponent has 2 pair. If Phil bets 200, the opponent folds. If Phil bets 70, the opponent thinks they're getting almost 3 to 1 and calls. Phil wins $70 instead of 0. This is value maximization through perception mathematics. Phil doesn't bet based on his hand. He bets based on what the opponent thinks they have. Phil Ivey has another math trick nobody talks about. He calls it blocker math. It's advanced, but it's simple when you understand it. A blocker is when you hold a card that reduces the combinations of strong hands your opponent can have. Example, you have the ace of spades. The board has 3 spades. You don't have a flush, but you have the ace blocker. Here's the math. There are 13 spades in the deck. 3 are on the board. You have 1. That leaves 9 spades, but you have the highest spade. This means no combination of opponent hands can have the nut flush with a high that you're not blocking. Phil uses this to bluff. If he has the ace of spades and the board has 3 spades, he knows that mathematically his opponent has fewer combinations of the nut flush. So Phil bets as if he has a flush. And it works more often because the blocker reduces the opponent's range. Here's the simplified formula. If you hold a key card that prevents strong opponent hands, add 15 to 20% fold equity to your bluffs. It's literally simplified combinatorics math. Now comes the concept Phil uses to decide whether to 3-bet or not. It's fold equity mathematics, and it's the most profitable thing you'll learn. Phil says, when you 3-bet, you don't need to have the best hand. You just need to have enough equity combined with fold equity to be profitable. Here's the formula. Fold equity times the pot size plus your equity, when called, times the expected value of the pot when you win. If the sum is positive, you 3-bet. Sounds complex. But Phil simplifies it like this. If you think your opponent will fold 60% of the time, and when they call you have at least 30% equity, you can 3-bet almost any 2 cards profitably. Practical example, villain opens from the cutoff. You're on the button. You have K9 suited, not premium, but you know this villain folds 65% of the time to 3-bets. When he calls, you still have 35% equity with K9s against his range. The math, 65% fold equity gives you the entire pot 65% of the time. 35% of the time you play for a bigger pot with 35% equity. Positive expected value. Phil 3-bets. Phil has a golden rule for mathematical decisions he teaches. If the decision is very close mathematically, always consider psychological factors. Math gives you baseline. Psychology gives you edge. Here's the example he uses. You calculated pot odds. It's exactly 50-50 whether you should call or fold mathematically. What do you do? Phil looks at the opponent. If the opponent is tilted, Phil calls, because he knows he'll win extra money on future hands. If the opponent is super focused and playing GTO, Phil folds, because there are no implied odds. Math gets you in the game. Psychology makes you win the game. Here's the complete system Phil uses in every poker decision. He calls it 3-step math. Step 1, calculate pot odds quickly. How much is in the pot? How much do you need to pay? This gives you the percentage you need to be profitable. Step 2, calculate your equity. Use rule of 4 and 2. How many outs do you have? Multiply. Do you have enough equity? Step 3. Adjust for implied odds or reverse implied odds. If you hit, will you win more? Or could you lose more? Add or subtract 20 to 30% from your equity. Done. 3 steps, 2 seconds. Decision made. Phil doesn't use calculators. He doesn't do complex math. He uses this 3-step system on every hand and wins millions. When you understand that math in poker isn't about being a genius, but about having a simple system you execute quickly, everything changes. Phil Ivey isn't smarter than you. He just has a formula that works and uses it 1,000 times per session. The difference between amateurs and legends isn't intelligence. It's system. It's having a way to simplify complex decisions into executable steps. It's transforming math into intuition through repeated practice. When you apply Phil's 3-step system on every hand, when you use rule of 4 and 2 automatically, when you think about implied odds before calling any draw, you stop being an amateur. You start playing like a legend. If you want to master poker math the way Phil Ivey mastered it, if you're ready to transform complex concepts into 2-second decisions, there's one place you need to be. Subscribe to Mind of Grinder on YouTube. This isn't just another poker channel. We're obsessed with simplifying advanced concepts, with transforming theory into practice, with giving you executable systems that work at real tables. When you subscribe, you get access to complete poker math breakdowns, hand analyses where we show the exact calculations professionals use, and training protocols to transform these calculations into automatic intuition. But what really matters is that you join a community that understands poker is a game of correct mathematical decisions repeated 1,000 times. People who are building careers based on 2 to 3% mathematical edges that, over thousands of hands, transform into millions of dollars. So right now, click that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss our content on simplified mathematics, advanced pot odds, and rapid decision systems. Join thousands of players who have already transformed complex math into consistent wins. Because when you have a system like Phil Ivey, when you can calculate equity in 2 seconds, you don't need to be a genius. You just need to be systematic. Mind of Grinder, where complex math becomes simple and simple becomes profitable.